So as I say, just looking at the people in the chat, and it's lovely to see some new faces and old faces as well. But for kind of context, and I won't spend a lot of time on this, I'll talk a wee bit about our project because I think maybe some of you maybe won't be as familiar. So the Authentic Voice project has been going for about 3 years. We are funded by the Scottish Government under their Delivering Equally Safe Fund, which is their Violence Against Women and Girls Fund. Now, just to let you know that because we do have quite a lot of people from outside of Scotland, we will be using Scottish terminology, we'll be using kind of Scottish phrases. It can be death by acronym. So if anybody isn't sure, just pop it in the chat and somebody will pick it up and we can do. Often we slide into this kind of speak, which again can be quite exclusionary. So we're definitely working on that. But yeah, so the project itself is working as a partnership project between the Safe Lives, who are a UK-wide domestic abuse charity that look to understand, kind of best practice, data and voice, and really bring that together to innovate in the domestic abuse field. And then we have the improvement service from lovely Sam. And Sam, I'm going to ask you to explain the improvement service because I always get it wrong and I don't want to offend anybody. So are you all right to jump in and talk a wee bit about that?
So the Improvement Service is the national improvement organisation for local government in Scotland. So the Protecting People team predominantly works with violence against women partnerships in Scottish local authorities and also any relevant agencies and partners that support that work in local areas.
So our project is really, thank you, Sam. Our project is really looking at how we can embed lived experience, and it stems from some work that was carried out about maybe 6 years ago on a project I was working on, and we set up a survivor panel to oversee that piece of work. What happened was we were getting loads of folk contacting us and saying, "Oh, can we speak to your panel? We'd really love to, know more about their experiences, etc." And it was becoming quite a lot of kind of conversations we were having, and we decided to really think about, well, there's a gap here particularly for violence against women and girls. Please, this project is about amplifying good practice and really understanding what's happening in other sectors as well. And there is phenomenal participation work that's happening across the UK, across Scotland in particular, with, the kind of trauma work, with the Promise, we've really established survivor reference groups as well. So we decided to kind of create a project that would look at not just how to carry out the practical side of things, but really embed that kind of lived experience work, that systems, that systemic change. And it became really evident from the get-go that we are talking about, particularly in the violence against women sector, and I'm sure this is replicated elsewhere, is that we are not just talking about survivors as a kind of homogenous group in a corner. What we're talking about is people that work within systems. We're looking at, some of the biggest employers are your NHS trusts, your boards, your kind of local authorities, etc. So what we wanted to do straight off the bat is really understand that, leadership will have lived experience. There's expertise that is learned, but there's also expertise that is lived as well. And people often occupy both spaces. And we started to have some really interesting conversations about this kind of work that was happening, and really thinking about, yep, we can set up panels, yeah, we can do consultations, yeah, we can look at, kind of participation in the gold standard of co-production and various other kind of buzzwords that we're kicking about quite a lot. But actually, sometimes the best thing is to start from within. And what this project is about actually learning from other people as well. So I'm really pleased to say we've got some excellent examples of our partners in third sector, our partners in local authorities and other spaces that are doing work to kind of really understand best how we support our workforces and workforce lived experience as well. Anything you want to add, Sam, or is that all right?
No, I think all good.
Fabulous. Okay. Next slide. So in the past 3 years, what we've been doing is some lots of different things. We have improvement support for local authorities, and we carry out workshops and really gather that kind of information and expertise from people that are working in this sector. We have set up an Authentic Voice peer networking space for people who are doing participation work with the violence against women and girls lens, but potentially we heard that people wanted somewhere to come and really speak about the nitty gritty, the things around power sharing, all that sort of really interesting stuff that's coming out from this work, and also gathering good practice examples, as I've said. We have been embedding the Authentic Voice principles that has came from work that Safe Lives have been doing for many years, and Alice is going to talk about that. But authentic voice is our phrase, if you like, for lived experience, and it's really thinking about that kind of bringing what you want to share and bringing yourself to your workplace or to, kind of work around violence against women and girls. We've also created a toolkit, which, if you've ever met me before, I kind of roll my eyes because we are death by toolkit, but also it's not a toolkit, it's a PDF, and it's got loads of things you can download and stuff. But we also have things like guidance on safety, consent and language that has been overseen by survivors at every juncture. So I don't know if Gemma's on the call, but Gemma Gall and Safe Lives and Alice as well from Safe Lives have been really instrumental in kind of pulling all this work together, as well as the internal lived experience experts and external experts as well. We also have an authentic voice panel who, if you've ever seen me speak before, I talk about them all the time. We had a conference last year that was organised by the survivors themselves, and it was quite something. So we'll be putting lots of stuff on the website. So on this slide here, we'll share the slides as well. So please, I know that'll be a question that comes up. You'll have links to our website, but also able to join our peer networking sessions too, should you be interested. And yeah, I think that's probably enough about our wee project.
Thanks so much, Sam. And thanks for having me along today. It's really great to be here and see so many people on the call as well. As Sam said, I'm Jenny Smith-Littlejohn. I'm the National Improvement Lead for our trauma work at the Improvement Service. And as Sam mentioned before, the IS is the National Improvement Organisation for Local Authorities in Scotland. And since 2020, we have been supporting local authorities and community planning partners with strengthening their capacity and capability around embedding a trauma-informed approach across services, systems and workforces, by facilitating opportunities to share learning and bring stakeholders together and develop tools and resources to support implementation, as well as providing some one-to-one improvement support as well in relation to this work. So Sam and Jen asked me to come along today to just give a little bit of background to the National Trauma Transformation Programme and the roadmap for embedding trauma-informed and responsive change. And just to give a bit of overview of some of the key drivers from the roadmap that are relevant to some of the work that we're talking about today. So in particular around organisational culture, staff care support and wellbeing, and power sharing. And I thought I would also share just very briefly some of the learning from across local areas from the National Learning Report, which we published last year. So very briefly, just to introduce the National Trauma Transformation Programme and the national ambition to embed a trauma-informed workforce and services across Scotland, which is a joint vision and ambition from Scottish Government and COSLA. The National Trauma Transformation Programme is a major and long-term change programme which aims to support that vision and provides a wide range of learning resources, guidance and implementation support for all sectors across the workforce, including leaders, both to upskill staff to the appropriate level of trauma-informed and responsive practice, but also critically to embed and sustain that model of working across our organisations and systems. And I think the key message from the NTTP is that embedding a trauma-informed approach supports all of the things that we're already doing in our roles and supports many of our national and local priorities, and it's increasingly being embedded into local and national policy, strategies and practice guidance, which I think just really reflects that commitment as well. And it's really designed to be not an additional demand, but a supportive demand that supports us to think about employee care, support and wellbeing and organisational culture change, and underpins much of some of the things that I think we're going to be talking about today. So I won't be talking about trauma or the specifics of what a trauma-informed approach is in any detail, but I thought it would be helpful to just give a quick high-level overview of some of this work, really focusing on organisational culture, staff wellbeing and power sharing parts of this work. So I wanted to just start off by sharing this logic model that's been developed by the NTTP, which I think helps us to start thinking a bit more about the outcomes of this work rather than just focusing on process or activities and the outputs. So this logic model really starts to try and give us some consistency across Scotland around what we're all sort of trying to achieve when we're talking about embedding a trauma-informed approach. It's also designed for any organisation to use and adapt, and kind of tailor to their needs and their service context, and also designed so that we can start to see that there are multiple benefits to this work. So for staff, for people with lived experience of trauma, and we know, as Jen and Samantha mentioned earlier, that those two categories are not mutually exclusive, but also the outcomes and priorities we're already working towards in our services and systems. And I guess the important point that I wanted to highlight is the inclusion of staff wellbeing and in these outcomes of the trauma work. So whatever the purpose of our organisation or our services, the wellbeing of our staff is really critical, and embedding the voice of staff and their lived experience is really critical. Our colleagues are people. There really is no kind of us and them, which is, I think, a really lovely theme for this event today as well. And given just the prevalence of trauma, we know that many of us will have experienced trauma ourselves, either in our personal lives or through our professional roles or through both. And we know that so many of us are feeling burnout, compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma, chronic stress, etc. through our professional roles. And that a lot of us are supporting families and communities with increasingly varied needs and complexity. And obviously resources are increasingly scarce and our capacity is increasingly reduced, but we can't support others if we're not feeling safe and well ourselves at work. So thinking about trauma when we're starting to think about this helps us to think about staff wellbeing, I think, and support through another lens as well. So just to briefly introduce the roadmap for creating trauma-informed and responsive change as well. It was published late 2023 and has been designed to help services and organisations to identify and reflect on progress, strengths and opportunities for embedding a trauma-informed and responsive approach across policy and practice. It provides that framework for local areas for implementing, and other organisations as well, for implementing trauma-informed and responsive change across their services, organisations and partnerships. And we know that workforce training is a key component of any organisation's journey to becoming trauma-informed and responsive, but evidence also shows us that equally important are the culture, environments and supportive ways of working that can really enable and sustain that change long term. And that is ultimately what's going to make a difference to all of us who are affected by trauma, no matter how trauma-informed a practitioner may be. If those workers are constrained by protocols or policies that don't recognise the impact of trauma, we might be unable to minimise the risk of re-traumatisation, even though we've got that training that has taught us to recognise those risks. And so that can leave staff feeling disempowered and create potential disengagement from people who we are supporting. So a lot of the trauma work focuses on the first three areas on this slide when we're thinking about how we can work in a more trauma-informed and responsive way. So we know that we can't support the people we serve if we don't first have a healthy organisational culture, or where staff don't feel safe, supported and well, and where our leaders really embody those principles of a trauma-informed approach. So I think sometimes we can jump to staff training and putting that emphasis on individual practice as the answer to lots of challenges, but the evidence shows us that can be a short-term fix. So we really need to think about our whole organizational culture. We really need to think about the services and the kind of context and culture that the practitioners are working within, and start there rather than jumping straight into training. We know from evidence and from quality improvement methodologies that this work takes time. It is a journey. It can't all happen at once. And I think crucially as well, want to emphasize that this is an additional thing for us all to do, but it can be something that can support many of the actions and recommendations that we've already identified as priorities within our services or organizations, and it helps bring that supportive and maybe a different lens to some of that work. So work across all those 9 key themes and key drivers that we highlighted in the previous slide can't happen at once. But it's also not a linear journey. It's not a journey where we're just working through one kind of driver at a time or one theme at a time. It is it is likely to kind of be much less kind of step by step than that. And I think most importantly, what we're seeing from learning in the Scottish context is that that emphasis on that first part of that journey and creating those right conditions in our service and our or organisation or within this wider system is what is really going to set us up for success. And that crucially involves understanding the experiences of our organisation, including our staff and the people who access our services. So we know that trauma needs to be involved early on in the work of organisations embedding people. Sorry, we know that people with lived experience of trauma need to be involved early on in the work of organisations who are embedding this way of working, so that that work is really informed by expertise, by experience, and expertise by profession and by leadership. So that needs to include both people who work within our services and people who access our services. And I think one of the things when we start thinking about the readiness of services and organisations to start this work is starting to think about what is the culture like. Are leaders committed to this in the long term? What are the staff working conditions like? Do they feel safe? Do they feel supported? Do they have capacity and space to take forward some of this work? And what is the kind of organisational care and support like for staff themselves within our organisations? So moving on to thinking a bit more in detail about some of these key drivers, I wanted to highlight in particular this organisational culture, which is really about what our organisation's culture looks and feels like. It can feel difficult to quantitatively measure this, but it's really embodied by the people who work within our organisations, and it's felt by the people who are working within or who come into contact with our services or our organisations. It's about the skills that we actively value, so empathy, or the ability to connect with people, or the ability to self-reflect and valuing those relationships. But it's also about what we choose to celebrate as organisations, including recognising that lived experience of trauma of our staff and the people who are delivering our services. So some of doing this well can include recognising the prevalence and impact of trauma for staff and for people accessing our services, and embedding those ways of working that can link those past experiences to current behaviours, and recognise and reduce the barriers that are created by that impact to support people's recovery and resist re-traumatization. But also recognising the value of relationships and ensuring that staff have the space, time, and skills to build those meaningful, trusting relationships, both with people they are supporting, but also with their colleagues within their teams and within our services. It includes empowering our staff to work in ways that embody those principles, key principles of trauma-informed practice, and where they feel able to implement changes when required and feel safe to raise any concerns. It includes using language that really reflects an understanding of the impact of trauma and is accessible to everybody, supporting that collaboration and empowerment, and recognizing power dynamics and imbalances, and being open and transparent about those in our interactions, both with our staff and with the people who access our services. And then I wanted to also talk a bit about power sharing and feedback loops. And I know that we are going to be exploring this in a lot more detail throughout the session this morning, but just wanted to highlight some of the key principles or key bits of what doing that well looks like from the roadmap. So power sharing is about collaboratively developing routine, safe and meaningful processes so that those of us who are affected by trauma and when we want to be involved in decision making are giving those opportunities to be involved in decision making about how services and systems are designed and delivered. And a trauma-informed and responsive organisations really values and encourages both professional and lived experience and expertise, and really embodies those values, ensuring that both leaders, staff, and people with lived experience of trauma have a seat at the table during decision making, and that includes both staff and people accessing our services. So That includes routinely and meaningfully integrating power sharing with people with lived experience into decision-making processes, ensuring that there are clear and safe processes and supports in place for power sharing to influence change, and taking into account the impact of trauma on relationships and power dynamics, and working collaboratively with people with lived experience to identify how our organization's success is determined, measured, and progressed. And I think really embedding that throughout our processes and not looking at it as a one-off job done, I think is really key to doing this well. So really embedding continuous feedback loops, continuous engagement with people with lived experience, and with our staff, and really thinking about what we're doing about the information, what we're doing next with the information that they're giving us, so that it's not just a ask and then nothing happens, but an ask and then we do something about it. And then I wanted to finish up just thinking a little bit more specifically around staff care support and well-being, and just recognising the impact of trauma for our staff. And that includes both our own personal and professional lived experience of trauma, but also the impact for staff who are working within our systems. And I think a trauma-informed approach really asks us to think about how staff feel and how their well-being is being valued, how it's being prioritised, and ensuring that they have that time and space to access relevant proactive and reactive supports. So that includes creating a shared understanding of well-being across our organisations, and proactively protecting and destigmatising well-being, positive modelling by our leaders, and ensuring staff are in an environment where they feel like we all experience those key principles of trauma-informed and responsive practice at work. And I think that is really about creating the conditions and creating a culture where staff are able to then engage with the practice supports, and really putting a trauma-informed approach into practice in their work. But if we're not supporting our staff in the first place, then they won't have the space or capacity to really engage with any of that. So it's really about laying the groundwork down for staff to be able to do this work and do it well. Putting in place a range of appropriate measures to ensure proactive prevention of vicarious trauma, including chronic stress and burnout, and as well as reactive measures to support staff when that is needed. So both about preventing the impact of working in these systems, but also then making sure that we do have supports in place if needed, if we've not been able to prevent those negative impacts as well. And then just to finish up, I just wanted to share some of the learning from our National Learning Report last year, which where we collated learning from across local areas across Scotland who are working to embed a trauma-informed and responsive approach across their organisations, across their systems and workforces. And I think in recognition of the impact of working with trauma, as well as the prevalence of trauma for many of us, staff wellbeing has really increasingly become a main focus of work across many local areas. And I think in this current climate of limited organisational capacity, making sure that staff have access to those proactive and reactive supports, and that they feel safe and supported, is really key to them being able to embed those changes within practice. And staff wellbeing is also increasingly being identified as a priority area by staff themselves. And I think that really reflects the kind of current climate that we're all working within, limited capacity and increased pressures on both staff and services. And embedding systems that promote staff care, support and well-being is one of the foundations of trauma-informed and responsive working. In local areas also really highlighted the need to consider both personal and professional lived experience of trauma and the impact for staff of working within these systems. And that's particularly, I think, pertinent in relation to not creating an us and them or a hierarchy of voice in relation to lived experience, which I know we will be hearing much more about throughout the event this morning, and hearing from organisations and local areas themselves about the work that they've been doing around this. So I'll just finish up there. Thanks so much for having me along and for listening. There's lots more information on the NTTP website about the Trauma Transformation Programme, and the contact details are on the slide there.
Yeah, thanks very much for inviting me along to speak today. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the work that we've done in Dundee City Council on Health and Social Care Partnership with our Workforce Lived Experience group. Some of you may have heard me speak a little bit about this at other events, but I would say that there's probably some updates in terms of where we are with this work, so hopefully it won't be too repetitive if you've heard some of it before. We're okay to move on to the next slide, Sam. And just for anybody's interest, I'm a lead officer in the Protecting People team in Dundee. My main remit is working with the Children at Risk Committee and Violence Against Women, and I chair our trauma steering group as well. So this bit of work goes all the way back to a time that seems like it was a different life before COVID, when the national trauma transformation work was really starting to come out to local areas with that ask that we started thinking about how we were going to implement it locally. And there was an opportunity back in 2019 to submit a bid to Scottish Government to get a little bit of resource and support around particular areas that we might identify locally that we want to focus on with our trauma-informed implementation work. So in Dundee, we submitted a bid with a focus on trauma training for our strategic and senior management teams, and also around developing the concept of workforce lived experience. So I'm obviously going to focus more on that second strand that we identified we wanted to focus on, but the two were really linked, and it was around organisational culture, I think, that we were really thinking about at that point in time. We'd had a quite hard-hitting report around the Dundee Drugs Commission at that point, and one of the recommendations from that was that we needed strong leadership, determination to stick with difficult tasks, but more importantly, a shared culture which values kindness, compassion, and the belief in hope. So we had a kind of a real mandate to push forward with this work. So move to the next slide, Sam, thanks. So the workforce lived experience part of it came about off the back of that organisational culture and thinking about, like Jenny mentioned, you know, training. We could go and deliver training, and we delivered still to the senior leadership teams. We were obviously looking at the workforce training, but that sense that wasn't enough, and the culture bit was what was interesting us. And I had come from a third sector background and come into the post at the point just maybe a year before this was all starting. And I'd worked at Women's Aid and I'd really experienced, I would say, a fairly advanced trauma-informed culture within the third sector and within that organisation. And also within Women's Aid, a kind of a different culture around lived experience, where there were quite a lot of people who worked within that organisation who had lived experience. That was quite an openly spoken about thing. It was very carefully managed and boundaried, but it was valued and almost, you know, it was accepted as a really valuable thing that people were bringing. So I had come from that culture, and I came into the sort of the public sector and was quite quickly aware that there was a different culture going on there. And that got me thinking about, there's an opportunity here if we could bring that lived experience more into the open in terms of us within the workforce all just being humans, that could play a part in shifting the culture. It wasn't the whole picture, but it was something that I felt would be a different way of thinking about how we change organisational culture. So we were thinking that as a cause and consequence of culture change, professionals within the workforce with lived experience of trauma would be able to contribute and co-produce services and strategy. And that thing of, we were hearing a lot about, we want to do that co-production work, we want lived experience voice, but people tending to go to, we need to engage with people who are currently using our services or who are currently experiencing these issues. And while we weren't saying that wasn't valid, obviously it is, and we wanted to do that, there was also this bit of me thinking, we're missing all the people who are in the workforce who also have potentially got a lot of lived experience to bring to this conversation. So there was just something that I felt was missing. And just from the stats at the time in the trauma transformation information that was coming out, you know, stats around childhood experiences, adult experiences. I figured out a little formula that within a team of 10 staff, at least 2 would be highly likely to have lived experience of some form of trauma. So when you kind of scale that up within a staff group of 100, at least 20. So I was thinking, you know, there's a huge resource here that we're not tapping into, and also that culture change element as well. We okay to move on, Sam? So we started thinking about how could we do that, and I think I say this every time, but when I first floated the idea, people looked at me like I had 2 heads and had floated down from Mars. It wasn't something that had been thought about before within the council, certainly. So it took quite a lot of groundwork to convince people that this was okay, that not only was it okay, but it could be really beneficial and that it was safe. There were some really valid concerns, and we had to spend quite a lot of time working through all that. So we had conversations with HR, we spoke to trade unions, and we developed a fairly robust process around it to make sure that we were addressing all the concerns people had and that we were doing this safely and ethically. So once we'd done all that work, we launched the Workforce Lived Experience Group, and we launched that at the same time that we launched our entire trauma transformation programme in Dundee. So we didn't launch the Workforce Lived Experience on its own. We kind of launched it as a package of things that we were putting out as offers. And we called it our menu of ways to get involved. So we started to speak about it. We didn't do a big launch. We sort of just started to put the idea out there because we didn't want to be overwhelmed. We wanted to make sure that we could manage it. And we started to get people coming forward to say they were interested in the Workforce Lived Experience Group. And then what we had developed was, with a psychologist and with HR, we developed this kind of a screening process where a person would express interest in being part of the group, and then one of us from the trauma steering group would have a conversation with them using this kind of screening tool, to make sure that their expectations, you know, of the group were in line with what the group was going to be about, to make sure that they had support, to make sure that they were in a good place to come and be part of this, to answer any questions they might have, and just kind of do all that screening to make sure it was safe. Once we do that, we then have a conversation about whether they want to continue, whether we think that they're in the place to be part of the group, and sign consent forms, etc. So I think we then had around about 12 people who had come forward, and we thought, well, that's enough for us to be starting, so we'll just keep it at that for now. We got the group together, and we had obviously clear boundaries that we discussed in our first few meetings. We spoke about confidentiality. We had some interesting things come up where people were saying, you know, what if my manager wants to join this group, but I'm in the group as well. So we had some things that we had to sort of work through, but we really took our time about that, and then spent probably a good year meeting and discussing, what do we want this group to be about? What do we want to do? And just kind of taking our time, taking a real slow pace with it, and making sure that we were doing it right. Are we okay to click on, Sam? So where we've got to now, the group, I would say we started with about 12. We've now got 7 core members. Some people decided it wasn't the right time for them, and that was absolutely fine, and we supported them to kind of to leave the group. Some people moved posts or moved areas, but we've had 7 kind of really consistent core members for quite a good bit of time. While we were kind of working out, what do we want this group to be about? How do we want to use our lived experience to influence? We did do some little pieces of work. So the council's HR team got in touch with us to say that they wanted to review, in particular, the absence management policy, and asked our group to do some work on it. So we did. We gave comment. We, you know, gave them some really robust feedback on that, and that's all been taken on board. And one of the really interesting things was one of the HR managers who was part of that, once she got that feedback from our group, I remember having a conversation with her where she said, do you know, when we started doing this, I was doing it because I was told I had to. And then she said, but now I'm doing it because I want to, and I can see how important it is. So that shift is exactly what we were kind of trying to achieve, I guess. So we did that bit of work. We've done some reviewing of some e-learning that's been developed. So sort of requests were coming into the group as word started to spread. But we eventually got to the point where we were like, right, what are we going to call the group? We're calling it the Workforce Lived Experience Group. That's lame. And so the group came up with the name Transforming Trauma Stigma to Strength. And that was because they were really having conversations about how that culture shift of being someone with lived experience of trauma isn't something to be ashamed of. It isn't something that we should be keeping hidden in that traditional, you come with your professional face and you leave your problems at the door type thing. And that there was a sense of pride in the survival and the recovery from traumatic experiences, and how that it's that post-traumatic growth bit. I'm not going to spend too long talking about it because I'm sure you're all aware. So that was the name that they came up with. And this is a screenshot of a sway that we've developed. So this is us now trying to recruit more people to the group, but I'll come on to that in a second. Are we okay to skip on, Sam? So we've got the identity now, and then we were like, well, what's the role? What are we going to do? So basically, we've decided that we want to offer a consultation function to services, organisations, or teams, considering any aspect of trauma-informed practice. So it could be a policy review, service redesign, communications, training modules, environmental changes, and that we would potentially carry out the work as a group, or alternatively, if there's one or two members of the group who have specific expertise or interest in the subject, it might be that we divvy it up between us. But we're not just going to be a passive group sitting waiting for requests. We're also going to identify and communicate things that we identify that need to be passed on to the trauma steering group or any other relevant departments or teams for consideration. So there's a kind of a two-way process. And essentially, there's a request form that if people want to request a consultation with the group, they complete the form. So that's where we're at in terms of the identity and the role of the group. I think the next thing we're going to show is a little video. So as part of the sway, with trying to recruit more people to the group, we decided to make a little set of videos of us just chatting and talking about the group, so that anyone who was thinking about joining could see us, could hear us talking about the group. There's 4 videos, I think. There's one about what attracted you in the first place. There's one which I'm going to show, which is what's been the best thing about the group. There's one about what have been the challenges, and there's one, what would you say to anyone thinking about joining? I love our wee videos. And this is just a quote from one of the members of the group who couldn't be part of the videos, but she sent in a quote which I think is also really, really powerful. So, being part of a catalyst for change towards employees with trauma experiences is a really positive experience and makes me feel proud that as an organisation we will be one of the first doing this work. Having lived experience of trauma has always made me feel this is something I have to hide from my employers, as I didn't want to feel judged for the effects this can have on both my mental health and physical health at times. Since joining the Workforce Lived Experience Group, I have actually become more trauma informed and actually understand myself so much better. I've done lots of reading around trauma and feel this is actually improving my own practice in the workplace as a result of joining the Workforce Lived Experience Group. So that's a little bit of added value, I suppose, that we didn't expect, but it's really nice to hear that as well. Can I get the next slide? And this is the last slide, so I'll stop chatting in a minute. So what's next for the group? I would say one of the things that's been challenging about this is it feels like a really special group, and I feel really kind of a strong sense of responsibility that we do it properly, we do it safely, and we don't get rushed or pushed. And we are all doing this within our work time as well, and all of us have obviously got busy workloads ourselves. So people are champing at the bit for us to be part of things. And there was discussions that People Services wanted to embed our group into the equality impact assessment processes and things like that. And we're like, that would be amazing, but right now I don't know that we have the capacity. So what we're doing is kind of a more stepped approach. So we're first of all going to try and look to recruit more members to the group, because like I said, we have 7, but depending on how much work comes our way, we're kind of recognising that we need more people so that we can potentially kind of divide the work amongst us. So the Council Wellbeing Advisor is going to be looking to try and do recruitment conversations with people as she goes about her work. So we're going to try that out and see if we can recruit, because again, I was like, I don't want to send out a big all staff email and suddenly have 30 people want to join the group and I'm having to do all the screening conversations. Like, I don't have the capacity to do that. So again, we're going to try and do that in a more careful, managed way. And we're going to test the consultation function with council people services, so HR essentially, and learning and organisational development, because they've already been involved with that piece of work around policies. But I know again that they are really, really keen to work with us. So we're kind of, I guess, formalising up that process a little bit. So we've already had a request. And I dropped off there. Am I back?
You're back,
You're
trauma-informed, trauma-informed and gendered. And they've come to our group to say, you know, could we provide any examples of when policies have worked well in terms of a trauma-informed way and when they haven't. So we're getting involved in that. So that's our first official request. And I think I will stop there.
Thanks, Sam. And thank you for inviting me along to the session. For those of you that haven't had the pleasure of meeting yet, because like, what is it they say? We're all friends who just haven't met yet. My name is Angie Pinkerton, and as Sam was saying, I'm the Trauma Lead Officer for South Ayrshire Council. Being here to talk about how we're trying to amplify the voices of lived experience within South Ayrshire and within our systems and our services is really important to me. Like many others, I have lived experience of trauma, which, you know, if I'm being entirely honest, has kind of been the lens I've viewed life through for many years. However, I also have lived experience of being a woman, a mother, a sister, a daughter. I have lived experience of gender-based violence, of suicide and self-harm. But I've also got lived experience of going to the theatre and travelling on a plane and shopping online. And intersectionality is so important when speaking about lived experience, as we are not just one thing, one label, and we have lived experiences of so many different things, which is why that kind of like us and them mentality really makes me laugh, because I'm not really sure what group I do actually belong to. So there's lots of amazing work going on in South Ayrshire with regards to co-design and co-production, including, you know, our alcohol and drug partnership and our children's services. However, today I just want to share some of the things that we've been working on to support that development of a trauma-informed Scotland that Jenny spoke of. So also just to say, I was talking about this before we started, that I've got imposter syndrome through me like a stick of rock. I have just had notification that a delivery is due to come. So there's somebody here to answer the door, but if you hear my dog start barking, I'll be quickly putting on my headset. So in 2021, the council agreed to employ a dedicated officer with focus on trauma. Since then, we have developed an integrated impact assessment that ensures all policies and programmes of work coming from the council have a trauma lens over it. We have developed a lived experience-led trauma network and a mental health first aid network. We've also developed a comprehensive in-house training calendar with trauma and staff wellbeing sessions, and I have supported policy review and redesign over the course of the past 3 years. However, fundamental to anything I do in my role is about ensuring we are listening to the voices of lived experience within service design and making sure that we are offering those genuine and authentic opportunities for collaboration and co-design and co-production. Not only is this central to developing and maintaining those trauma responsive systems and services that Jenny was talking about in her slides, it's also essential in supporting sustainable changes in others by ensuring that we are providing services that actually meet the needs of the people accessing them, rather than what works best for us and our reporting mechanisms. So some of the ways we have tried to do this is in relation to our 4 priorities you can see on the screen of leadership, engagement, development and sustainability. So I'd like to share some examples with you today. The first example is our in-house trainers of who can deliver mental health first aid, trauma training and taking action for whole health and wellbeing sessions. Using our trauma trainers as an excellent example of where we've been working within the principles of collaboration, co-design and co-production from the very beginning. So when we were thinking about commissioning a train the trainer, it was important to us that the company valued the voice of lived experience in their ethos and in their trainer selection. We ultimately selected Epion Training and Consultancy, who stated that the selected trainer should have existing lived experience of trauma and have the capacity to present that material by using their own practical experiences, and those could be either personal or professional. This ethos sat really nicely with us, and therefore all trainers were selected because of various criteria, but including lived experience of trauma. The trainers not only used their experiences to highlight some of the more academic models when, really brings the training to life, kind of allowing, participants, to resonate with participants, own personal experiences, but they also support the ongoing co-design and co-production, as we're really trying to ensure the message is relatable across South Ayrshire and has the most up-to-date and relevant material. Moreover, without them being able to deliver training as part of that wider training calendar, we would not be able to see the numbers of people that are being trained as high as they are. I would also argue that it's their experiences and authenticity when delivering, the fact that they don't position themselves as that specialist or academic expert, that makes the training so well received and numbers continue to grow. However, we were faced with various concerns over supporting the voice of lived experience within our trainers, ranging from who actually has lived experience. So back to my earlier comment that I've lived experience of lots of things, some more in depth than others, but all as valid as the next person. So telling someone that they either didn't have enough lived experience or their experiences weren't really relevant to our training really isn't what we were about. Is it personal or professional? So initially we thought we were being really inclusive by having this personal or professional experience and really trying to break down those barriers, but we ended up facing lots of challenges we hadn't even thought of, such as should professionals be telling staff about their own lived experience of trauma? Is it okay, for the lived experience people to do that, but not for those paid employees? And these are just some of the things that we were told us. I was even once told that in a professional paid role that I should not be sharing my own stories, as it made me look a bit weak and not as professional. Another colleague was told his input was actually more meaningful than mine, as he had lived experience. Whenever I hear that, I always think of it in inverted commas. He promptly replied with, "So does Angie, and by the way, I'm also a professional." So it's not one or the other, is it? Some even accused us of looking for sympathy and making it all about our own pain, which was very hard for those sharing to experience and quite re-traumatising for some. So we ensured that we had the appropriate support for our trainers and secured reflective practice sessions to ensure that we were sharing safely and appropriately for all in attendance. We have also just recently completed our first annual impact report, which has been overwhelmingly positive about our trainers and how they provide an environment with those 5 principles of safety, choice, collaboration, trust and empowerment at the heart of every training session for each other and the participants. We're also currently involved in a Trauma Aware Communities pilot with the Resilience Learning Partnership, where we're supporting community connectors with a lived experience to co-facilitate conversations across communities, and we're really excited to be a part of that. Next thing I want to share with you is our lived experience-led multi-agency trauma network, and it's called South Ayrshire Through a New Lens. Before I started in post, it was agreed that in line with the national vision, we should have both a top-down and a grassroots approach to system change. Therefore, it was decided that we would have a governance group with senior leaders and a separate lived experience group. However, I wasn't really keen in such a divide, as I thought that we ran the risk of remaining a top-down approach where only senior leaders had any say. So when I developed the trauma network, I opened invites to all staff working in South Ayrshire to ensure that we had that diverse representation. However, we were still facing challenges with this, and there seemed a narrative kind of was gathering that the leadership group were the experts with the power to influence, and the network was simply there to sense check with no real power or influence. However, many people in attendance shared that the network is such a positive and safe space to be, that word of mouth now seemed to grow, and we're now sitting at around 90 members. Curiously, questioning those hierarchies and power differentials is essential in a trauma responsive environment. Therefore, as lead officer, I had always chaired the meeting. However, we started then looking at getting a rolling co-chair structure to ensure sustainability. Moreover, the divide between the groups still existed, so we have since developed one steering group that consists of a mix of the leadership group and the trauma network, who are also our trauma champions. This ensures that everyone's voice is heard around the table, The network's still going strong and plenty of opportunities to inform the steering group and raise awareness and share good practice, but they're also key players in organising our first cross-cutting conference we have planned for September this year to ensure we really are trying to join up those dots. Another example of how we've used peer support model is the Mental Health First Aid Network. Our Mental Health First Aid Network is made up of people with lived and living experience of mental health. They have, of course, attended our 2-day training course, but it was vital for us that there was a kind of genuine and authentic understanding that could be felt from staff rather than just taking that traditional corporate approach. Consultation and engagement told us that people were concerned about sharing any wellbeing related information with management. Staff wanted to be able to raise concerns about how they were feeling without fear of consequence. So when we developed the network, it was important it was a confidential space where staff could share without the information being passed on to managers. On the Wellbeing Hub, they have bios that introduce them as people rather than colleagues. Share a little bit about themselves, such as hobbies and families and even pets. But there's also a wee bit that highlights in a very subtle way their areas of interest. This way, if you wanted to speak to someone about addiction or domestic abuse or mental health, then you can select your first aider without anyone else having to know what kind of help you're looking for. Again, we were faced with some concerns with regards to, and I quote, sadly, unqualified people playing at specialist roles. There were valid concerns around re-traumatising people without the proper wraparound care for both, again, that person accessing support and the first aider. However, there was also concerns that we were in danger of diagnosing people or saying the wrong thing that could inadvertently escalate a person's distress. So we created a paper to highlight the purpose and value of the peer support network and what would be involved in it. It was then agreed we could run a pilot to test engagement and monitor any risk. And we have now gone from 13 first aiders to 52. They hold monthly conversation cafes in the canteen where people can drop in and chat or just kind of get to know them in a more informal manner. The network is now fully supported by HR, with staff being signposted to the team for support, with all previous confidentiality agreements remaining in place. Lastly, I want to just tell you quickly about our lived experience input into service design and delivery. So I've been involved in various policy rewrites and updates, as I mentioned earlier, but the two that I'm most pleased with is our staff wellbeing strategy and our Pathways to Hope document. This was a document that was designed to help staff support people with thoughts of suicide or self-harm. Both of these documents, before a single paragraph was written, were informed and developed by the voices of lived experience. We held various forms of engagement through surveys, focus groups, and large consultation events. We're also really keen to these remain as working tools and delivery plans as opposed to just another corporate strategy in the intranet. The consultations were also co-facilitated with voices of lived experience, and all data and drafts were made available for feedback. We faced some concerns that arose from a kind of pure fear-based response, that it was okay to consult with people with lived experience. And again, a bit of a quote, to read over the document and tell us how good it is. However, and this was the real kicker, can a person with lived experience really write a strategy? After all, I went to university to be qualified enough to develop strategies. So as you can imagine, a lengthy conversation followed that, which I'm not going to go into right now. This, of course, is a really lengthy process and took as much longer than initially anticipated, and it caused some issues with dates and workforce plans and such like. However, now everyone agrees that the feedback was essential and it has produced a much more meaningful document that can actually be used as well. Our service are now working on a corporate engagement strategy that is amplifying the voice of lived experience at the heart of all our engagement, and our Health and Social Care Partnership has a dedicated action on improving engagement with lived experience communities. We're also looking at ensuring we offer appropriate remuneration for those collaborating with us. This will likely take the form of our South Ayrshire Loves Local gift card. However, we're also aware this may not suit everyone, and I hope we can gain some learning through a pilot where we can see what works, what we can see better, what works and what doesn't. We ran into some issues when I was trying to secure remuneration for the staff involved in our work, as it was argued that we cannot be seen to be paying staff over and above their wages. However, I'm very calmly trying to point out that their jobs do not include an element of payment for sharing their lived experience to support service design, and therefore should be treated the same as everyone else. But again, it's a journey. I'm only one person in the organisation, you know, within my role, and I would not be able to do half of what I do without the fantastic people of varied experiences that I work alongside. I don't always get things right, and I've previously used the terms co-design and co-production incorrectly. However, I am happy with the direction that we're working towards. We're receiving less and less concerned queries and more offers of support. We're at the beginning of a very long journey. However, I'd rather keep moving and trying to make change as we go. Mistakes are simply learning points, and if we waited until we had it perfect, then we would never actually start. And I love the quote, so start where you are with what you have, and ultimately do it with compassion. So thank you for taking the time to hear our journey so far. So, you know, if there is any questions.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for coming along today, and also Jen and Sam for having me. It's really great to hear all the presentations that have been happening, and really excited for that shared learning that can happen as well from this, and to hear from what other people are doing, so that we're kind of sharing what's happening and not reinventing the wheel, but going off a good practice. I am from Safe Lives. My name is Alice Rowe. I am the Authentic Voice Lead Coordinator, and I have the pleasure of working alongside our pioneers. I'm just going to run through a little bit to begin with what Authentic Voice is at Safe Lives, and kind of what I do in my role. So if I can have the next slide, please. So pioneering is our term for those who work with us who have lived experience. Our pioneer group is 11 members strong, and that's made up of 6 internal staff pioneers, and then we have 5 externals. They have very different motivations for why they wish to pioneer, and they choose to share their expertise and insight of domestic abuse, and a commitment to making a difference to the lives of survivors. As others have mentioned in their presentations, we come from a place of belief, so there's no justification that people have to give for their experience or why they want to be part of the group. And we have a real variety of people with their lived experiences. Pioneers are involved in many areas, including external presentations to both partners that we work with and external requests that we get in. They're also involved in practice improvements, consultation responses, events, research, and some media requests that we can have come through. If I can get the next slide, please. So authentic voice in practice. So what does authentic voice mean in Safe Lives? It means that survivors are at the heart of everything that we do. So from the beginning of work that we do all the way to the end, whether that's both internal or external projects that we take part in, they help us to be human, rigorous and brave in the work that we conduct. When we speak out, we're all empowered. So how do we share those platforms? How do we share that voice and that learning from across the pioneer group that we have? And importantly, and from the title of today as well, there is no them and us, only us. Something that drew me to Safe Lives was the recognition that domestic abuse, as we've mentioned in previous presentations, doesn't just happen to people out there. It's also happening, or has happened, with colleagues of ours. You know, people come to work as colleagues and as employees, but they also come to work as people, and they bring with them a variety of different lived experience. We have a quote from one of our pioneers here, which says that being a pioneer, you feel like you can achieve anything. I know with the backing of Safe Lives that we can see, that they can see what I do, and they are so supportive. I know that I am going to change the world. Next slide, please. So just a bit of a history of the journey of Authentic Voice within Safe Lives and how we've got to where we are today. So we first started off with a family, friends and survivors group, and that really gave Safe Lives at that time the recognition that more influence, visibility and connection was needed around survivor voice and engagement. This then helped us move towards the pioneer model and really look at how we start from the inside out. So how we start with those who are working with us and have lived experience, and how we connect in externally about that as well. And that's where our pioneer model was then kind of formed. That then moved to an AV strategy, so authentic voice strategy, so how we embedded authentic voice into our DNA, looking across our work streams of data, voice and practice. From there, our authentic voice principles were created, and that was co-created and adapted with our pioneer group. So our principles cover a few different categories, which are do no harm, experts by experience, speak your truth, heart and start, equality and diversity. And I know Jen has mentioned earlier a few resources that she has as well from the Scottish side. So hopefully we can share that, which reflects those principles as well. From there, we also looked at developing a toolkit. So looking at practical tools to aid organisations in taking the leap to embrace an authentic voice. So sharing our learning, sharing our insights from the work that we've done and hearing from pioneers and the work that they've been doing as well, both with us, but also externally, and how we can create a tool to help others with that. And then we move to authentic voice in local practice. So looking at how we work with our practice colleagues within Safe Lives to support local areas to develop their own individual authentic approaches. So being that critical friend, being that support around authentic voice and that fluidity and flexibility. And how does authentic voice work for you? How does it work in your areas or the projects that you're doing, the workforce that you're doing? Can I get the next slide, please? So yes, talking about authentic voice from the inside out. So really looking at know, them and us, just for structure of how authentic voice works within Safe Lives and the role that I do. So we have our staff pioneers, so people with lived experience within the organisation who wish to come forward and be part of a pioneer group to take part in kind of external consultations that we have in some of those activities I mentioned at the beginning, internal project work, highlighting areas that they feel that we need to develop or work on as well within Safe Lives, as well as things like media requests that we come in or any passion projects of theirs. We also have external pioneers, and those opportunities are shared to both pioneer groups. They do work together, they meet each other, there's that collaboration and networking together as well. And then we have authentic voice on the board, so we have pioneer trustees, and also just a nod within Safe Lives, we have our change makers, who are our young people who have lived experience of abuse and are supported by my colleague Christy. And then we also have the Scottish Authentic Voice panel, which Jen has mentioned earlier. So they're kind of the streams that we have alongside that recognition of staff who, for whatever reason, don't see pioneering as being something that they may wish to engage in, but they bring their own lived experience through the work that they do, the meetings that they're attending. So there is that recognition that even if, say, there's not an identifiable pioneer on a meeting, there will still likely be lived experience represented in that meeting. I just wanted to go through kind of the visibility of pioneers. So looking at staff pioneering in particular, it is up to that individual's choice how visible they wish to be within pioneering. We have some pioneers who are very open with their pioneering. We have others who like to separate it from their role and their job, and that's completely up to them. There's no set quota of activities or events or engagement that they need to do. We do have peer support network meetings as well for people to link in with and get updates, and like I say, bring ideas as well of areas that they wish to develop or look into or question, and then it's my role to help support in that. We are, similar to what Andrew just mentioned, we are having discussions on remuneration for staff pioneers. External pioneers are remunerated for their work, and it's a piece of work that I'm doing currently alongside HR colleagues on looking at the options around remuneration, and really looking at that principle of equality, equity and diversity in that, so that we're treating those who work for the organisation in a fair way as we do with external pioneers. Something that I do within my role around pioneering as well and lived experience throughout Safe Lives is linking in with colleagues around things, for example, like our training events, looking at internal messaging that's sent round, and getting that balance of support for shared learning or awareness raising sessions that we have that cover quite a lot of topics that we would work in around domestic abuse. So looking at the creation of content warnings and balancing that bubble wrapping that can sometimes happen and we get feedback from people versus actually just that level of care and connection, and recognizing that people, even though they work in the sector and may have done for years and years, there will be days where people are affected more by what they're hearing or listening. And at the end of the day, everyone's human, and it's just about offering that support where needed, and also linking in with colleagues across the organisation as a collective voice. So that's part of my role. Within staff pioneering, anyone can become a staff pioneer at any time. The kind of process is to have a bit of an informal chat with myself to begin with, look at what they are looking for pioneering, what it could look like for them, linking in with a peer for that kind of one-to-one talk about what staff pioneering has been like for them, and then to look at getting them integrated within the group if that is what they wish, or that they can come back at any time in the future as well if now is just not the right time for them to take part in that. And yeah, I think that's just linking. I think a key thing for me as well is that linking in across the organisation. As has been mentioned, often these roles can be done by one person, and actually how do we link in for support around HR, for example, and further support around training colleagues or linking with managers, and yeah, how do we get that spread out and as supportive as possible as a whole organisation approach. Next slide, please. These are just some key learnings and reflections that I kind of wanted to end on for my part from one of our staff pioneers. So they've shared with me, there's 6 different areas from their experience, just around key points that they wanted raised. So the first being the importance of safe disclosure and support. So looking at workforces, creating environments where individuals feel safe to disclose the abuse that they have or are experiencing. So this includes having clear policies and support structures in place for survivors, especially roles, as we can see in things like social work or advocacy, where vulnerability is often compounded by the stress of the job. Really looking at that culture change, what work do we need to put in, how can we support in doing that? Looking at coercive control in professional settings. So that recognition that for a lot of people, the manipulation of their job and professional standing is a tactic that's used all too common in abusive relationships and by perpetrators or those who choose to harm. It demonstrates that the need for workplace protections and training around domestic abuse is really important, particularly for those in high-stake roles. The impact of systemic racism and bias. So this person's lived experience as a Black woman in the workplace, the added stress of having to navigate those systems that are systematically racist and biased heighten the challenges that they faced. And it's crucial to address the intersectionality of domestic abuse and racism in workplaces to support those individuals and communities who are often silenced when experiencing abuse and can experience that silence from many different areas in their experiences. Can I get the next slide, please? And then the next 3 are the trauma-informed practices. So this person reflected on the support that they've received from Safe Lives since joining, and that's then highlighted for them the trauma-informed approaches to the workplace. So the environment created at Safe Lives has allowed them to thrive, showing how critical it is for employers to understand and support staff dealing with trauma. And I think there's a difference, as we can see often, in being trauma-aware versus trauma-informed, and actually how do those then link in with those support systems, those policies that we need in place to support our colleagues. Advocating for equity and fair treatment. So ongoing work, as I mentioned earlier, about addressing pay inequalities between internal and external pioneers. So a reminder of the importance of fairness and equity in all aspects of survivor services. So it's a fight for fairness is a vital part of creating a truly supportive and just environment survivors working in the field. So we as Safe Lives embrace and respect openness and speaking up when we need to, and also that that reflection of where we're not getting it right yet and what can we do to get there, and how do we bring people along in that journey, have that transparency and openness, and create those safe spaces to have conversations like one around remuneration, and be honest in what we can, not over promising people options, but actually having discussions and really building in time to think that through thoroughly, and see what options are available. And then lastly, resilience and recovery. So despite the significant barriers that this person's faced, they've learned that recovery and resilience are possible with the right support. They use their lived experience to advocate for others and are committed to challenging systems and services to do better for those who are still living in silence and fear. And I think this is the key point as well, or one of the key points I would say around engagement and working with people with lived experience, is moving away from that tokenistic behaviour that we can see around, you've created something, it's ready to go, you consult with people, and if they give feedback, the answer is, oh, well, apologies, it's already been printed or launched. that, you know, that's not engagement, that's not consultation, that's not co-creation. Actually, people have a lot of expertise and insights to bring from their lived experience, and these are skilled people in their roles as well with colleagues. So how do we change how we look at participation and including people from the heart and start, from the beginning, from the development, in those fundraising or bid meetings as well? How do we get voice embedded in there in a way that is trauma informed and supportive and real advocacy, I would say, as well. And I think that's been reflected across the presentations this morning, and just seeing about that true voice and embedding from the beginning, hearing what people are saying. And it's system change, it's hard work, but we just keep knocking on that door and we keep going and we keep doing it. And yeah, I really appreciate being invited along today and hearing all the great work that's happening across Scotland and the UK as well. So thank you. I think that's me. Can I get the last slide? That is me, yes.